And it is their words in their language, as Trevor's pointing out, what they're doing. Trevor and I have been all over Oregon. We've had him as far south as Roseburg, Sutherland, Eugene tomorrow night, Portland tomorrow at lunch, and out to La Grande, and then on Monday we're going out to Pendleton so he can meet the Indians and play sticks and learn what that's all about. But he is truly a great person. I refer to him as the modern day Paul Revere, Trevor Loudon.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks to Debbie and all your people for inviting me here. And a big thanks to Rodney, because if Rodney hadn't done what he's done, I wouldn't be here today. He's done a huge amount of work for me and for the cause in general. I hope you can all hear me okay. Yeah. Can you understand my accent all right? Yeah. I tend to elongate my E's. I have bacon and eggs for breakfast, and I travel around Texas and things like that. So if you can't understand me, put your hand up, please. Look, it's lovely to be here, and Rodney wasn't quite accurate. Not every state reminds me of New Zealand, but Washington and Oregon certainly do. It's green, beautiful hills, and I saw sheep yesterday for the first time in 3 months, and it really excited me. I thought, wow, you know, this is cool. Yesterday I was down in Eugene, and this is why I love the Tea Party, and there's a big contrast here. I was down in Eugene at Lane Community College, I think it was, and Bill Ayers was speaking there. So Rodney and I had to go along and talk to Bill, and we had a bit of a confrontation with him, but the big thing surprised me. There was all these people in this room, about as many as here, and you know what? They didn't say the Pledge of Allegiance. Can you believe that? Billy is not saying the Pledge of Allegiance. So that is the big difference between them and us. You know, they don't care about the Constitution, and people here do. And that's why I'm here, because I'm proud to be associated with people who care about the Constitution of this country and American exceptionalism and America's great role in the world. So I better get started. You want to hear about your president? You know, your great president. Yes, sir?
Do you really mean that?
You mean what?
Great president.
Oh, he's great in a certain way, as Stalin was great, and Mao Zedong was great, and Hitler was great in a certain perverted way. But, look, okay, a lot of people ask me why, as a New Zealander, I should care about internal politics of your country. And I say two reasons. And the first one is very simple. It is simple gratitude. And I notice the number of veterans here today. I am grateful to this country because of the huge sacrifice that your uncles and fathers and cousins made in the battles of Guadalcanal and the Coral Sea and Midway during World War II. If it hadn't been for their huge sacrifice, my country would have been subjugated by the Japanese, and I wouldn't be here today. So we guys owe you a lot. And it's here time to return the favour. A lot of people don't say thank you to America, but I'm here to do that. The second reason is related. It's a little bit more selfish. Ronald Reagan had it right. This is the last best hope of mankind. If freedom fails in America and you lose your military dominance, freedom will fail in every country of the globe. The Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, the Cubans, the Nicaraguans, the Venezuelans, the North Koreans, and all their allies will carve up this planet amongst themselves, and there will be nowhere left to run. I live down at the bottom of the South Pacific, and a lot of my fellow Kiwis are very smug because we think we are far away from any danger and no one can hurt us. But 1,000 miles to the north of my country, Fiji, beautiful little islands of Fiji, the Chinese are now training the Fijian army. Fiji has a Marxist government, and the Chinese are building big hydroelectric plants on that island. Fiji is now effectively a Chinese client state. And the Chinese are buying up influence and expanding their influence right throughout the South Pacific, including Australia and New Zealand. And I will tell you that the day, God forbid, that the US Navy stops patrolling the South Pacific, that is the day that my country becomes a Chinese vassal state. And for my sake and my children and grandchildren's sake, I never want that day to come. So I have a very strong vested interest in you guys staying free and you people staying strong. The whole free world depends on that. Now, what I'm going to talk about today to lead into your president is what I call the central secret of communism. And that is not atom bomb spies or labour union agitators or Occupy demonstrators in the streets. It is the ability of a tiny Marxist-Leninist party to get their policies implemented as the law of the land in their native country. Now that might sound a little bit far-fetched in the West because these parties are usually very small, often only a few hundred people. How could they possibly influence the policies of a large democratic Western country? How could they do it? Well, I want to give some examples to prove my case, and I want to start out with my own country, New Zealand. Some of you may remember, back in 1984, my country elected a socialist Labour government. And one of the first things they did, their number one priority, was to enact legislation banning nuclear warships from our harbours. And guess what that achieved? That achieved the destruction of the Australia-New Zealand-United States military alliance, ANZUS. It destroyed it stone cold dead. We banned your ships from our harbours, the ships of a country that had saved our bacon only 40 years before. So how did that happen? How did a pro-Western country at the height of the Cold War turn its back on the Western Alliance and our greatest friend in the world? Well, a few years after that, I interviewed a New Zealander who had infiltrated the New Zealand Communist Party for our security intelligence services, the equivalent of your FBI. And in 1983, he was chosen for the greatest honour any communist could enjoy. He was sent to Moscow to study at Lenin's Institute for Higher Learning on Leningradsky Prospect. And this was a huge, huge school. There were 7,000 students at any one time, many of them on 7-year courses, some of them with one-to-one tutelage. And at that school, there were Sri Lankans and Filipinos and South Koreans and Australians and South Africans and Kenyans and Tunisians and Bolivians and Argentinians and Panamanians and Mexicans and Canadians. There were virtually every country of the world was represented except for one nation, the main enemy itself, the United States of America. And why were there no Americans training in Moscow? Because at some point, your government had told the Soviets that were any Americans caught training at that institute, there would be war. And the Soviets respected that, but what they used to do, they would train Canadians or Mexicans or New Zealanders in the doctrines they wanted promoted. Then those people would go and train the American communists. So they still got round it. So my friend sat down in Moscow at the Institute with the KGB and tutors from the Institute and his tiny little communist delegation, and they had a plan. What they wanted to do was break away a country from the Western Alliance in the hope that this would lead to the breakup of NATO, that this would cascade. And New Zealand, because this was the time of the anti-nuclear marches in Europe, when Reagan was beginning to fight his Star Wars battles, when Reagan was fighting the communist Nicaraguan Sandinistas in Central America. This was a key time in the Cold War, and the Soviets needed to break it up. They needed to break away a country from the Western Alliance, and they chose us because we were small, we were socially liberal, we had a very strong Communist Party which had a lot of control of the New Zealand peace movement, the New Zealand Labour movement, and had a lot of secret members inside the New Zealand Labour Party. So we were the target. They thought, how are we going to do this? Because we are a pro-Western country, we love America, how are they going to break us out of the Western Alliance? So they thought that they worked out the slogans, they worked out the psychology. They thought they'd play this on a patriotic angle. This was going to be all about Kiwis standing up for peace, New Zealanders standing against the nuclear arms race, charting an independent course, standing up to Uncle Sam. So they worked out the slogans, they worked out the psychology, and this small delegation of communists went back to New Zealand, and they had meetings with the New Zealand Council for World Peace and the Federation of Labour and the Labour Party. They even signed a contract with the Labour Party in the Hotel Workers Union rooms in Marion Street in Wellington to get this implemented, and in a few short months, the Soviets couldn't believe how quickly this was done. A few short months, that legislation was put in front of the New Zealand Parliament and it was passed, and a long-standing alliance was destroyed at the stroke of a pen. And I will tell you, if you talk to any Kiwi that you meet about New Zealand's anti-nuclear stand, and it still exists today, not even the Conservatives dare to overturn it, they will tell you, yep, that was our idea, we thought of it, that was New Zealand proudly standing up against the nuclear arms race, proudly standing up for peace, and we back it to the hilt. And not one New Zealander in 100,000 has any idea that that policy was formulated at Lenin's Institute by the KGB with the purpose of breaking up the Western Alliance. And that is how it's done. But could that process happen in your country? The great anti-communist, pro-free enterprise country like the United States of America. How could the communists here, who most Americans don't even realise still exist, how could they possibly influence legislation in your country? Is it conceivable? Well, I'll give you a couple of examples, and I'll start out with a small symbolic one. Down in California, every year, they have a Cesar Chavez holiday. A day off work to honour the great founder of the United Farm Workers Union, Cesar Chavez. Cesar Chavez, who trained with Saul Alinsky himself, the Marxist agitator, worked with communists and socialists his entire life. He marched under his famous slogan, "Se puede." "Se puede," yes we can. Heard that one before? Yeah. Obama is just reusing it again for his Latinos for Obama campaign. Se puede. The woman who got that holiday implemented and passed through the California State Legislature is Evelina Alarcon of the Cesar Chavez holiday campaign. Now, she enlisted a whole lot of left-wing Labour Union people, a whole lot of left-wing movie stars, and she used all her contacts to get that passed through the California State Legislature. And now she's trying to do it nationwide, and her website, you can go and check it out, proudly lists the endorsement of Barack Obama himself for her campaign. Got a big picture of him on the right up there. Evelina Alarcon is the leader of the Southern California Communist Party USA. So Evelina Alacon, a hardcore Marxist-Leninist, has changed the legislation in California and may do it nationwide, and she has a personal endorsement of your president. So if you don't believe me after that, I'll give you another example. And that's one you're all familiar with, one that's going to change your country forever if it's allowed to stand, and it cannot be allowed to stand, and that is Obamacare. Obamacare stands to socialise between 1/6 and 1/4 of your economy, and if you get it in, there is no going back. And I come from a country with socialised healthcare, and I'm telling you, you do not want it. The founder of this, and I will acknowledge that Obamacare is not yet fully socialised single-payer healthcare, but we all know where it's going to go if it's allowed to stand. And I'll tell you, the founder of the single-payer socialised healthcare movement, the father of that movement in this country, is Quentin Young, medical doctor out of Chicago. He's pushing 90 now, but he has been working since the 1950s, absolutely tirelessly promoting single payer. He set up numerous organisations, worked with the Canadians, worked with doctors' alliances all over the country, worked with state legislatures, several congressmen including John Conyers, and he has got single payer legislation put in front of your Congress on many occasions. But he's always failed until 2008, when Barack Obama was elected and the legislation went through, pushed through your Senate in the most underhanded manner. Quentin Young, it's no accident that Barack Obama did the dirty deed, because for many years Barack Obama had a personal physician in Chicago, and that was Quentin Young. Quentin Young openly boasts that he indoctrinated Obama into the ideas of socialised healthcare. He's boasted that on several occasions. He's claimed to be Obama's political mentor. Quentin Young was a 40-year veteran of the Communist Party USA until he left that organisation to set up a new Marxist group, Democratic Socialists of America. And I will guarantee you, not one American in 100,000, unless they've read my book, understands where Obamacare came from. It is a communist, socialist policy pushed on your country by Quentin Young. So please never tell me that one man cannot change the world, because that man stands on the verge of changing your country forever, and by extension the rest of this planet. So he must be stopped. How it works is simple. The communists in this country, the Marxists, Democratic Socialists of America, have reconquered your labour movement. In 1995, the old anti-communist regime of Lane Kirkland and George Meany was pushed aside, and John Sweeney took over leadership of the AFL-CIO. John Sweeney is a Marxist, member of Democratic Socialists of America, and he removed the anti-communist clause from the AFL-CIO Constitution. And since that time, the Marxists have flooded back, and every single major labour union in your country is now under the control of the Marxists. SEIU, AFSCME, NEA, you name it, they own it. And how it works is, this is how it works. The communists, the Marxists, set a policy, something they want to become the law of your land. They give that policy to the labour unions, and the labour unions elect the Democrats. And there's hardly a Democrat in this country at any level who has not been elected with labour union support and money. And he who pays the piper calls the tune. The communists set the policy, they give it to the labour unions elect the Democrats, and they tell the Democrats what policies and what legislation to promote, on whether it's in the state legislatures or in your Congress. So a small group of Marxists can use their leverage of labour union power to get more or less any legislation they want on your state legislatures and your House of Congress. That is how they control your political process. Do it all all the time. If you want to know what the Democrats are going to do tomorrow, you read the Communist Party's People's World or Democratic Socialists of America's Democratic Left Today, because what's on the pages of those publications today will be on the floor of your state legislatures and your Congress tomorrow. That's the procedure. So we'll look at Mr. Obama. Well, a lot of people say to me that Barack Obama made a great movement, but I say different. I say a movement made Barack Obama. And that movement started in Hyde Park, Chicago in the 1950s. Now, Hyde Park is a leafy, affluent, lovely suburb in the bleak industrial heartland of South Chicago. And it's a hangout for socialists and communists of every stripe. In the 1950s, the Communist Party and the Socialist Party got together to form an alliance to take on the Daley Democratic machine that then ran Chicago, the corrupt Daley machine. And they knew they had a job on their hands, so they had to get together and they had to form a broad alliance. So the Communists and the Socialists joined with the Labour unions and the Latino population of South Chicago and the black population of South Chicago. Now, does that alliance sound familiar at all? You've seen that in action in recent times? That's where it started. So the first person they elected was Leon Dupre to the Chicago City Council. He was a lawyer. Back in the 1920s, Leon Dupre used to go down to the local rifle range with his great friend, the Marxist agitator Saul Alinsky, to practice rifle shooting for the communist revolution they believed was just around the corner. In the 1940s, Leon Dupre was going down to Mexico City to visit with Leon Trotsky, the exiled Soviet leader, then hiding out from Stalin himself. Later, Leon Dupre became a mentor to Barack Obama. The next person this alliance elected was a guy called Harold Washington, a black lawyer. They elected him to the mayoralty of Chicago in 1983. And Harold Washington was a long-time communist fronter, and he filled his administration from top to bottom with Marxists. Absolutely riddled it. And that lasted until 1987 when he died unexpectedly of a heart attack. The next person they elected was Carol Moseley Brown to the US Senate in 1992, a long-time Communist Party fronter. She lasted one term. She was corrupt. She was kicked out of power. And what did Bill Clinton do with her? He sent her down to New Zealand as ambassador to my country. So thank you very much, Mr. Clinton. It was a great honour. Then in 1996, they elected Barack Obama to the Illinois State Senate. Then in 2004, they elected him to the US Senate out of Illinois. Then in 2008, by using their alliances nationwide, they put Barack Obama into the White House. And he who pays the piper calls the tune. Barack Obama knows who put him there, and he is fulfilling their agenda every single day of his term, the communist and socialist agenda. So why is Barack Obama so amenable to that? What framed him? What formed him in life? We all know about mentors. We've all had mentors in our life. People have guided us through the critical teenage years, the younger years. The very first significant mentor to Barack Obama was Frank Marshall Davis. He was a Communist Party member in Chicago in the late 1940s. He was a journalist, a poet, a writer, very prominent in the black left scene of Chicago at the time, which was a very, very vibrant movement. But in 1948, Frank Marshall Davis left that all behind. He left the glamour and glitz of Chicago to go out to a little backwater in the Pacific called Hawaii. And it was a backwater in those days. This was before the tourist trade, before statehood. So why would Frank Marshall Davis do that? Well, at the time, Stalin had ordered the US Communist Party to bulk up the Hawaiian Communist Party, to move comrades off the mainland out to the islands. because that's where Pearl Harbor was, your major military base. And Stalin wanted as many spies on the island as he could to monitor activities on those bases. He also wanted agitators to try and close the bases down. The communists were also anticipating Hawaiian statehood, because they knew if they could take over the local Democrat Party when statehood came, that would guarantee them 2 more far-left senators in your US Senate in perpetuity and a whole bunch of left-wing congressmen. And that would help move your country left and marginalise conservatives and Republicans. That is why the communists have always backed the DC statehood movement, and why they today back the Puerto Rican statehood movement. It's nothing to do with the rights of Puerto Ricans. It's all about getting more far-left senators in your Senate and more radical Marxist congressmen in your Congress to marginalise you people forever, keep you out of power. So what do, they play the numbers. In Hawaii, Frank Marshall Davis was a good communist, worked inside the Democrat Party. He also worked for the Honolulu Record, a labour union publication. That was run by a guy called Koji Ariyoshi. Ariyoshi was a party member. He had served in the US Army during World War II with Mao Zedong's communist forces against the Japanese Army. After World War II, Ariyoshi moved to New York, where he worked with the Amerasia magazine people. Amerasia was a left-wing magazine staffed by communists, including several known Soviet spies who worked to influence your State Department against Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist Chinese in favour of Mao Zedong's communist Chinese. And because they won that battle, 500 million Chinese were delivered to the communist forces. That small group of traitors delivered a huge country to the communists, with implications we're still feeling today. So, Frank Marshall Davis, in Hawaii, he had a bit of a hobby. He had a hobby, and the FBI, who were watching him continuously, were very concerned about this hobby, because they watched Frank Marshall Davis going out to photograph obscure beaches and geographical features and bays and inlets all around the islands. And I think they suspected espionage, because they put Frank Marshall Davis on what they called the security index. And that meant, had war ever broken out with the Soviet Union, Frank Marshall Davis would have been arrested that very day. So not all communists were on the security index, only the particularly dangerous communists, and Frank Marshall Davis qualified for that honour. About 1970, Frank Marshall Davis was introduced to the young boy Barack Obama by Obama's grandfather. Obama was 10 or 11 at the time, and Frank Marshall Davis had his ear for about 8 or 9 years. He was his mentor, and this was the man who used to write poems praising the Red Army, poems praising Stalin, and tracts viciously criticising KKK racist America. And this is the man who had your president's ear in his most formative years. Sorry? Oh, sorry. So a lot of people will say, though, that by the time Frank Marshall Davis met Barack Obama, he was just a dope-smoking old alcoholic. You know, his red days were way behind him. All that was in the past. But as late as 1979, Frank Marshall Davis was still listed as an endorser of the American Committee for the Protection of Foreign-Born. And right under his name was another man listed called Hugh DeLacy. Hugh DeLacy. I'd like you to remember that name, a native of your state. The American Committee for the Protection of Foreign-Born was the leading Communist Party front of the time. So there's no evidence at all that Frank Marshall Davis ever ceased being red. He was a 40-year veteran of the Communist Party. He died as red as when he started. So Barack Obama leaves Hawaii. He goes to Occidental College in Los Angeles. There he mixed with Tom Hayden's radical crowd. and the Democratic Socialist Alliance people on campus. Then he went out to Columbia University in New York, and while he was there, he attended at least one and possibly two of the annual Socialist Scholars Conferences that were then convened by Democratic Socialists of America. And these weren't phone box type gatherings. These were 2,000 to 3,000 people in a hall, radical Marxists, labour unionists, black activists, radical feminists, gay activists, all gathered together, plotting and discussing how to bring your country to its knees. And Barack Obama was right in the midst of that. So Obama then decides to go to Chicago. And why did he go there? He openly states he went there because he was inspired by the election of Harold Washington to the mayoralty of that city, the radical Marxist Harold Washington. He even applied for a job in Washington's administration. He didn't get that, but he still went to Chicago. He worked with Acorn and the other radicals of South Chicago. Then he went to Harvard, got a law degree mixed with Marxists there, and came back to Chicago to pursue a political career. And the woman who got Barack Obama started in politics, his first job, was an Illinois state senator named Alice Palmer. Now, Alice Palmer decided to run for Congress, and she generously handed on her Illinois state Senate seat to Barack Obama. And she took Obama around to meet the people he needed to know, the labour union people, the donors, the liberals. She was the woman who took Barack Obama to the famous meeting in the drawing room of Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn, the Weather Underground terrorists. Quentin Young was at the same meeting, and that was Barack Obama's introduction to the Hyde Park left, the people who had started that movement many years before. But Alice Palmer had a bit of a history herself. In 1980, Alice Palmer was invited by Maurice Bishop, the communist dictator of Grenada in the Caribbean islands, to the first anniversary celebrations of that country's Marxist-Leninist revolution. And I have copies of the invitation cards. They're in my book. My friend later, Maurice Bishop was killed by some of his own comrades, and in the ensuing chaos, Ronald Reagan sent troops into Grenada to restore order. And my friend was in Moscow training at that time, and I can tell you the Soviets were absolutely spewing that Ronald Reagan had gone in to destroy what was to become the second Cuba of the Caribbean. So congratulations to Ronald Reagan for doing that. Now, in 1983, Alice Palmer went to Prague in communist Czechoslovakia for a meeting of the Soviet Front World Peace Council. Now, this was the major Soviet front, still exists, and it had affiliates in virtually every Western country in the world, and its purpose was to destroy the Western military alliances, to destroy Western arms spending, and basically break up any military opposition to Soviet plans. They were fifth columnists inside every country. In New Zealand, it was the New Zealand Council for World Peace, which helped implement our anti-nuclear policies. In the United States, it was and is the US Peace Council. And Alice Palmer also served on the executive of the US Peace Council, alongside Barbara Lee, who you now probably know as a Democratic Congresswoman out of California. So I want to get the point across. Alice Palmer was intimately involved in organisations that wanted to destroy your military. Alice Palmer was also the head of the Black Press Institute, a nationwide network of black communist journalists whose job was to sow Soviet disinformation and agitate amongst your country's black population. In 1985, she took 16 of these people to the Soviet Union, to East Germany and communist Czechoslovakia for meetings with the Czech Foreign Affairs Department to talk about what was happening in this country. In 1986, Alice Palmer was the only African-American journalist to cover that year's annual conference of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union in Moscow. The same year, she was elected international president of the International Organization of Journalists, a major Soviet front aimed at influencing journalists all over the planet. Alice Palmer's job was specifically to monitor activities in the US, Canada, Mexico, and the Caribbean. She was also there to implement what they called their New Information Order. And the New Information Order was all about what they called issues of media fairness. Media fairness. Now, who here remembers the fairness doctrine in this country? Yep. And I asked you to consider where that fairness doctrine may have come from, given that the Soviets were so keen on promoting it. The fairness doctrine was abolished by Ronald Reagan. It was the idea that if you owned a radio station and you put a conservative talkback host on for a couple of hours in the afternoon, you had to give equal time to a liberal. Because it wasn't fair that conservatives should attract an audience and sponsorship, and the poor, dumb liberal sap should get none of either. As though there wasn't enough liberal media already. So the left decided to even things up, and they basically saddled your media with this provision that made conservative talkback uneconomic. And when Ronald Reagan abolished that, conservative talkback flowered. You got the Rush Limbaughs and the Sean Hannitys and all these people that I'm sure have educated many of you people here today. If it hadn't been for Ronald Reagan doing that, there would be no Tea Party movement, or certainly not one of the size you have. So to put it and that is why, you ask yourself why Barack Obama wants to reintroduce a fairness doctrine and extend it to the internet in the form of what he calls net neutrality. And I guarantee you, if he is returned, he will do that. Why would he want to do that? Could it be because he may want to shut you people down? Shut you up? Give the Liberals more of a chance, as if they need it? So to put it bluntly, Alice Palmer, the woman who got your president his first job in politics, was a high-level Soviet operative. There's no other word for it. She was intimately involved in the communist international apparatus and had connections in the governments of Czechoslovakia, the Soviet Union, and East Germany. And she got your president his first job. Frank Marshall Davis, Alice Palmer, any pattern starting to form here at all? Okay, we'll come to the present time. And you're judged by the company you keep. And I've got to say, I'm very, very proud to be judged by this company here today. Very proud. Two of the key people around Obama today. The first one I'll talk about is the other half of Obama's brain. And even the Liberals call her that. And that's Valerie Jarrett, Obama's key advisor in the White House. There is nothing Barack Obama would not share with Valerie Jarrett. Valerie Jarrett introduced Obama to his wife. She fundraised for him, introduced him to the liberal left of Chicago. She is advisor number one in the White House, no question. But look at her pedigree. Valerie Jarrett, her mother is Barbara Bowman, a child psychologist out of Chicago. She runs the Erickson Institute, an organisation which has had huge impact on early childhood education in this country. In 2009, President Obama gave Barbara Bowman an award for her work, and that award ceremony was prominently featured in the pages of the Communist Party USA's People's World. The Erickson Institute was named after Erik Erikson, an errant disciple of Sigmund Freud. And if there's any old 60s hippies in the audience, and I'm sure you wouldn't admit it if you were, you may remember the phrase identity crisis. That was Erik Erikson. Okay? Erik Erikson was expelled from Berkeley University in the 1940s because he refused to sign an anti-communist loyalty oath. He was also a lecturer at the California Labor School, the Communist Party's key trade union school at the time. On the board of the Erickson Institute have served Tom Ayres, the father of Bill Ayres, my friend from down in Oregon, and Bernadine Dawn, the wife of Bill Ayres and a famous terrorist in her own right. Look at the other half of Valerie Jarrett's family, her late father-in-law Vernon Jarrett, a very prominent black journalist in Chicago, very, very well respected. The last thing he did when he was dying of cancer in 2004 was to issue a call from his deathbed to the black population of Chicago to get out and vote for Barack Obama in that year's Senate primaries. And they did. Vernon Jarrett had been watching Obama for some years and promoting his career where he could. Go back to 1946. Young Vernon Jarrett, then served on the Illinois State Executive of American Youth for Democracy, a very noble sounding organisation. I'm sure you'll agree. I'm sure you all wish your kids would belong to something like that. But it wasn't even the youth wing of the Democrat Party, it was the youth wing of Communist Party USA. In 1948, Vernon Jarrett was serving on the publicity committee of the Packing House Workers Strike Committee. The Packing House Workers were a communist-controlled trade union. They're on strike, and Vernon Jarrett was writing their press releases and propaganda. On that publicity committee with Vernon Jarrett served Frank Marshall Davis. So isn't it interesting that these two people, Valerie Jarrett and Frank Marshall Davis, and Barack Obama, who now run your country from the White House, can both trace their political lineage back to the Communist Party of Chicago of the 1940s. Aren't you lucky? Exactly. Now we'll look at the other half of Barack Obama's brain, which doesn't leave very much, really. Okay. Not much. And that is David Axelrod. Dear David, character assassin, kneecapper, wins elections by blackening the name of his opponents. But he is the man who took an untried candidate, a novice senator with a funny-sounding Islamic middle name, up against Hillary Clinton's mighty machine, and he beat her. Now that takes some skill. David Axelrod is now sitting in Chicago trying to get your president re-elected. He is the man, more than anyone else, who put Obama into the White House. But where did David Axelrod learn his trade? Where did it happen? In 1975, in the mid-70s, when David Axelrod moved to Chicago from New York to study political science in Hyde Park, he was picked up and mentored by two very prominent Chicago journalists and activists, Don Rose and David S. Cantor. Now, Rose and Cantor mentored Axelrod for some years. They got him his first job in journalism. They all worked together on the Harold Washington campaigns and the Carol Moseley Brown campaigns, and possibly some others. They were very, very tight. But Don Rose and David S. Cantor, before they had picked up David Axelrod, had a little magazine in Hyde Park, Chicago for about 8 years. It folded. It was called the Hyde Park Kenwood Voices, and it was the voice of the Hyde Park left. It used to carry articles about Quentin Young's trip to North Vietnam during the Vietnam War to give aid to the communists. It carried articles about his son Ethan's trip to Cuba to cut sugarcane for Castro. It covered the SDS riots in Chicago in 1968 on the side of the SDS radicals. It carried a regular column by Abner Mikva, the local Democratic Party congressman. Now, Abner Mikva was in Congress for many years, and most of the time was spent working against your Second Amendment. He hated gun rights, hated the thought that you people could have your own weapons. And that was his main cause during his time in Congress. When he left Congress, Abner Mikva openly became a supporter of Democratic Socialists of America. And as a lawyer, he also spent a lot of time mentoring your future President, Barack Obama. He also mentored another very prominent American I'm sure you're all familiar with, and that is your current Supreme Court Justice, Elena Kagan. So Don Rose and David Cantor. Don Rose was a long-time communist fronter. His Chicago, right since World War II, his Chicago Red Squad file, the police file on him, names him as a dangerous anarchist. He was a long-time executive member with Quentin Young, Obama's doctor, of the Chicago Committee to Defend the Bill of Rights, the leading Communist Party front in Illinois. The other half of the partnership, David Cantor. His father, Harry Cantor, was the leader of the Massachusetts Communist Party in the 1930s. He was jailed for a year for sedition over the Sacco Vanzetti case when 2 Italian anarchists were executed for murder. After getting out of jail, Harry Cantor took the whole family, including baby David, to Stalin's paradise, to the Soviet Union, where they lived for many, many years. But by 1948, David Cantor was back in the States, living in Chicago, editing the student newspaper at the university, the Chicago Maroon, and was an active member of the Communist Party. Go forward to 1960. David Cantor and another communist named Leroy Wolins, who went on to found Veterans for Peace. There is such an organisation. They were running a little publication company out of Chicago called Trans World Publications. And they were paid a regular subsidy by the Soviet embassy in Washington to distribute Russian and communist literature all over your country. The 2 men were actually required by your State Department to register as agents of the Soviet Union. Go forward to 1964. Anybody here remember the famous presidential race that year between Barry Goldwater and Lyndon Johnson? Yep, there's a few of you here. Okay, Lyndon Johnson was a Democrat. He won. And we got the Great Society, the biggest advance in socialism in this country since the New Deal. The Great Society that put millions of people in this country on welfare, basically destroyed whole generations of the black population of this country. And then we got the riots of the 60s. Barry Goldwater, on the other hand, was a very principled conservative, a constitutionalist, a patriot. He would have loved the Tea Party, and the Tea Party would have loved him. He's a great man. And I will say to you that had Barry Goldwater won that election, this country would be a stronger and happier and richer place today. But he didn't win, and one of the main reasons he didn't, I'm not saying the only reason, one of the main reasons was because he was viciously vilified in the press as a racist, a fascist, and an extremist. Has anybody here heard those terms in recent times? They're familiar at all? It's coming from the same source. One of the main sources of the vilification of Barry Goldwater was Trans World Publications out of Chicago, David Cantor's little publishing firm. So I'm telling you that your Mr. Axelrod, who now sits in Chicago trying to get Barack Obama re-elected, learned his trade at the hands of a Soviet-paid professional black propagandist and character assassin. So it was no wonder that David Axelrod uses the tactics he does today. Now that brings me to what I consider to be the true agenda of the left in this country. You know, what do they want to do? Do they want to make you like France? Is that why they get up every day and go to their Labour Union office, or their Democratic Party office, or their non-profit office, or down to the Occupy movement? Why are they working like they are? What is their long-term goal for this country? Now, before I say what I think it is, I want to build up a little bit of credibility for an Albuquerque high school math teacher named Mark Rudd. Now, why would I want to do that? Who is Mark Rudd? Mark Rudd was the brains of the Weather Underground, a terrorist leader. He led the famous riots at Columbia University in 1968, the SDS riots that made headlines all over this country. Very destructive. In 1969, he was in Cuba training under a KGB major. In 2006, Mark Rudd came out of retirement and he joined up with a whole bunch of radicals to set up a new organisation. And they were Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dawn, and another Weather Underground terrorist leader, Jeff Jones, who helped write Obama's stimulus package, by the way, and Tom Hayden, and Angela Davis, and David Graeber, the father of the Occupy movement, and a whole bunch of communists and Marxists got together to set up Movement for a Democratic Society, because they love that word. And Movement for a Democratic Society was the adult support network for the new Students for a Democratic Society, the new SDS, which is now active on campuses all over your country. They were the people that created Merry Hell at the Republican Party convention in Minneapolis just a few years ago. In 2008, Movement for a Democratic Society spawned an offshoot. Tom Hayden and some other Marxists got together and set up a new organisation, and they called it Progressives for Obama. And that was designed to unite far left behind their candidate. And Mark Rudd endorsed Progressives for Obama. So Mark Rudd knows the left. He's been an intimate part of it his entire life, and he personally knows people who have worked with Obama. So when Mark Rudd correctly predicts Obama's agenda before anyone else knew it, and writes about Obama, I give him some credibility. I listen to what he says. So in 2008, just after the election, Obama surprised a lot of people. He appointed some conservatives to positions in the defence establishment. And a lot of people on our side of the fence went, thank God for that, Maybe he's not such a radical after all. Maybe he will play to the centre. Maybe he is a moderate. Maybe all this terrorist stuff is just so much hokum. But the left were spewing. They were irate that Barack Obama, their man, the man they helped get into power, could appoint conservatives to positions in the hated military-industrial complex, the main enemy. So Mark Rudd's inbox was filling up with irate emails from comrades all over the country. They were, what the hell is going on here? So Mark Rudd knew he had to settle the comrades down, get them back on board with the agenda, back on board with the plan, back on board with the president. So he wrote a little article for the Rag blog out of Austin, Texas. The Rag blog is widely read on the left, run by former weathermen, former SDSs, a lot of people with connections to the Cubans. And this was the article he wrote to calm the comrades down. I'll read from it, because I think this betrays where Obama is taking this country. It's called Let's Get Smart About Obama. Rag blog, November 28th, 2008. And you can look this up, it's still online. Obama is a very strategic thinker. He knew precisely what it would take to get elected, and he didn't blow it. He knew he had to play to the centre to not be run over by the press, the Republicans, or scare centrist voters away. He made it. So he has a narrow mandate for change. The economic agenda will stress stimulation from the bottom sometimes and handouts to the top at other times. Is that what's happened? On foreign policy and the wars and the use of the military, there will be no change at all. And never threaten the military budget. That will unite a huge majority of Congress against him. And I agree with this strategy. Anything else would invite sure defeat. Leave the military alone because they're way too powerful for now. by the second or third year of this recession, when stimulus is needed at the bottom, people may begin to discuss cutting the military budget. Now, where are we now, ladies and gentlemen? 3 years in, right? You're worried about your jobs, your businesses, paying your taxes, keeping your mortgages up to date, keeping your kids in college. America is focused on the economic issues, and who can blame you? Because I would be. But while you're focused there, what is smiling Leon Panetta, your Secretary of Defense, doing over at your Pentagon right now? Slashing your military to the bone. 20% of US federal spending is taking nearly 100% of the cuts. Barack Obama has even proposed cutting the US nuclear arsenal by 80%, down to 300 nukes. The Russians have thousands, let alone the Chinese. What was Mr. Obama talking about a few weeks ago with Dmitry Medvedev, the Russian president? Caught on hot mic, right? Didn't think he was being listened to. When I get re-elected, Dmitry, I'll have more flexibility to deal with you people. Pass on my regards to Vladimir. And Dmitry says, yes, we are with you. What is he with him on? Who has been funding and subsidising the peace movements throughout the West for the last 50 years? Who has wanted to destroy your military more than any other thing? Russians, Chinese, Cubans. Who stands to gain if your military is reduced and reduced and reduced? Who stands to gain the most? Could it be Russia, China, Iran, Cuba, Nicaragua? Because they know that your military and your taxpayers, your ability to fund that military is the only thing standing between them and world domination. And if you wanted to destroy this country's sovereignty forever, what would you be directing your efforts towards? What would be your number one target? This is why this is a serious issue, folks. This isn't about a depression, because you can survive that. This isn't about losing some of your rights. This is about reducing your military to the point you can not only not defend your allies like Israel and New Zealand, you will not even be able to defend your own homeland. This isn't about making your country like France. This is about making your country like Cuba. And if that doesn't work, this is about turning your country into a pile of ashes. This is serious stuff. And this is where your president, whether deliberately or not, is taking your country and every other country in the Western world. Now, Mark Rudd hadn't finished. He went on to say, Obama plays basketball. I'm not much of an athlete, barely know the game. But one thing I do know is that you have to be able to look like you're doing one thing, but do another. That's why all these conservative appointments are important. The strategy is to feint right, move left. Any other strategy invites sure defeat. So what is Mr. Rudd, Comrade Rudd, admitting here? That basically his candidate scammed his way into the White House by pretending to be a moderate, but his agenda has always been left. And Mr. Rudd approves of this strategy, this plan. And he also admitting that Mr. Obama has your military firmly in his sights. That is the number one priority of the left. That is where nothing else compares to that as far as the left is concerned. If they can take out your military, they have achieved the dream they have been after for 50 years. And what is happening right now? While you're all worried about keeping afloat. That brings me to smiling Leon Panetta himself. Very affable, amiable man, very well liked, voted into to the Secretary of Defence 100-0 through your Senate, the man who took out Osama bin Laden. But what is Smiling Leon's record? He's got 2 years military experience, and I know there's a lot of people in this room who have a lot more than that. He's a budget man. That's what he did in the White House. He's a budget specialist. He is there to smile and grin, keeping the public and the Republicans on side while he guts your military. That is his role. Look at his history. Leon Panetta, a left-wing Democrat, and his record is there for anyone to see. Left-wing Democrat out of Santa Cruz, California. Now, the Santa Cruz Democrat Party is not like the Iowa Democratic Party or the Nebraska Democratic Party or the Idaho Democrat Party. It is the far-left, lunatic fringe, nutcase California Democrat Party. A little bit like the Washington Democrat Party. And Oregon. Yep. Leon Panetta had Democratic Socialists of America Marxists on his campaign committees. He worked with Marxists like Adam Laird on campaigns. He campaigned for the release from jail of Leonard Peltier, an American Indian activist from the Dakotas. Peltier murdered in cold blood 2 FBI agents, and Leon Panetta tried to get him out of the slammer. He's still there, thankfully. Leon Panetta spent most of his time in Congress agitating against Reagan's Star Wars proposals, criticising US defence spending, and criticising Reagan virulently for opposing communism in Latin America. He was a far-left Democrat. He is also associated with the Institute for Policy Studies, a far-left institute out of Washington with known ties to both the KGB and Cuban intelligence. But Leon Panetta and Sylvia Panetta also had 2 friends in Santa Cruz, and that was Hugh and Dorothy DeLacy. Hugh DeLacy of the American Committee for the Protection of Foreign-Born. The Panettas and the DeLacys were best friends. They had parties at each other's houses. Leon Panetta even read the eulogy at Hugh DeLacy's funeral at the Loudon Centre in Santa Cruz, spelt differently, but still my name. And 3 members of Democratic Socialists of America also read that eulogy. Hugh DeLacy and Leon Panetta shared a 9-year series of letters, which I have, and those letters were all about how terrible Star Wars was, how terrible Reagan was for opposing communism in Latin America, how US defence spending had to be cut and the military-industrial complex had to be reined in. That was the whole tenor of their correspondence. And Leon Panetta should have known, or had to have known, that Hugh DeLacy during that time was going down to Nicaragua to visit with the communist Sandinistas and was going to Spain to visit with the Spanish Communist Party. But Hugh DeLacy had even more of a history than that. From 1946 to 1948, he was a left-wing congressman out of guess which state? Washington. Seattle. And that was the time when they used to talk about the 47 states of the United States and the Soviet of Washington. Because Hugh DeLacy spent most of his time in Congress agitating for the US to abandon Chiang Kai-shek's nationalist Chinese and throw their support to Mao Zedong's communist Chinese. And that wasn't surprising because all the time Hugh DeLacy was in Congress, and right up until at least the late 1960s, he was a secret card-carrying member of the Communist Party USA. Not the first secret communist in your Congress, and certainly not the last. There's many of them. But the devil looks after his own, and Hugh DeLacy got his reward for that work in the 1970s. That year he was contacted by an old friend from the 40s, a guy called John Stuart Service. Service and DeLacy had worked together on Chinese issues in the 1940s. John Stuart Service was a member of the Amerasia Spiring, the people who gave China to the communists. And he arranged for Hugh and Dorothy DeLacy to get a month-long, all-expenses-paid trip to Communist China in 1975. And while they were there, they visited the collective farms and the factories and watched the kids wave the little Maoist flags and all the good stuff. But they also had time to visit with 2 American expatriates in China. One of them was Frank Ko, then working as a propagandist for the Communist Chinese government. Frank Ko was a former member of the Amerasia Spy Ring and a former member of the Silver Master KGB Spy Ring of the 1940s Washington DC, that is. The other guy they talked to was Solomon Adler. Solomon Adler was another Amerasia man, another former member of the KGB, the Silver Master KGB spy ring, and at that time was a serving advisor to the Chinese intelligence services. He was a live Chinese spy while Hugh DeLacy was visiting with him in China. So back in the United States, Hugh DeLacy was also corresponding with Don Wheeler, a communist from this state, Washington State, Yakima, I think, around that area, dairy farmer, another former member of the Silver Master KGB spy ring. He was also corresponding, while he was corresponding with Leon Panetta, with Victor Perlo, another communist from Connecticut, another former member of the Silver Master KGB spy ring. So this Mr. DeLacy, the secret communist, while working with your Leon Panetta, your Secretary of Defense, knew 4 former Soviet spies, one of whom was then working for the Chinese intelligence services. He was also serving as West Coast agent for In These Times, a Marxist journal out of Chicago. Now that was run by a guy called James Weinstein, a former communist, founder member of Democratic Socialists of America, once peripherally involved in the Rosenberg spy ring of the 1940s, the people who gave Stalin the A-bomb secrets. In 2002, James Weinstein and a bunch of Chicago communists got together and set up a big anti-Iraq war rally in Federal Plaza in downtown Chicago. And one speaker made his name at that rally nationwide as an opponent of the Iraq War. He put his name on the map across this country, and that was, of course, Barack Obama. So I repeat my claim. Barack Obama didn't make a movement made Barack Obama. And elements of that movement do not owe allegiance to this country. They owe allegiance to countries who've been working to destroy your defences for decades because they want to take your country out of contention. So that is why I think Mr. Obama's conversation with Dmitry Medvedev is a very, very important and something you should all take to heart. Now, I don't want to depress you people with all of this. Am I a little late, perhaps? Too late? Because I'm here for a reason. Because if I didn't think there was hope for America, I'd be building bunkers back down on my homeland. But I'm here because in 2008, the left thought they had a slam dunk. They had the House, they had the Senate, and they had the White House. Their agenda was ready to roll, and they were going to steamroll Middle America into oblivion once and for all. They were going to finish you off as an independent nation. But in 2009 and 2010, you people, and hundreds and thousands and millions of you all around this country, you stood on your Constitution and you marched in the streets and you voted and you campaigned and you blogged and you wrote and you worked your butts off, and you basically kicked the left so far up the backside they're still reeling today. And they hate you for it, which is why I love you for it. because you stalled the left stone dead. You stopped cap and trade, you stopped card check, you slowed down and watered down Obamacare, you changed the composition of state houses all over this country, and that's very, very important because that means now more states can give the finger to the federal government, put it crudely. And you took back the House, and that stalled the left stone dead. And they don't know how to deal with you. That's why they've set up this communist Occupy movement, and they're campaigning to counter you. They think you've gone away to a degree, but they don't understand that this is 1773 of the Second American Revolution. They don't understand that you guys are now working in the state legislatures, in the county commissions, in the school boards, electing good sheriffs, fighting back Agenda 21, altering the, primering out rhinos, promoting conservatives for Congress and Senate. They don't understand that you are changing this country from the bottom up. Yes. They do not see that, but I see that. And you think about it, this is 1773. 2012 is not the end of this process. This is the beginning, because you are altering this country in ways you cannot even see. And you think back in 1773, there was a bunch of, most of the people were either Tories or apathetic, but a small group of people, maybe 15, 20%, who were united by an ideal, a bunch of farmers and shopkeepers and labourers and fishermen and seamstresses banded together, and they took on the greatest empire the world had known to that point, and they beat them. And how miraculous is that? And now this is the second time around, and you people are on the front line of this battle. What you are doing is historic. And I come to this country and I talk to Tea Party groups, and they all say to me, look, this is tough going. It's hard. Are we having an impact? Are we doing the right thing? And I say to you, as an outsider, I am blown away by what you have achieved in 3 years. Absolutely amazed. I didn't see this coming. But you people have rediscovered your Constitution, rediscovered American exceptionalism, and you have made so much progress. It is unbelievable. And I know it's hard to see it when you're in it, but there are millions of people around this globe watching what you guys are doing, rooting for you every step of the way. Because we know that when you prevail in your country and restore your republic and your constitution to its rightful place, that will inspire millions of us around the world to do the same. This has big implications. Huge implications. So please do not forget the historical significance of what you're doing. And if you're going to work your butts off for any 6 months of your life, if you're going to put the hard yards in, what better time, what more important time to do it between now and the elections? Yeah. Because what you do between now and then is going to have more impact on your children's future and your grandchildren's future and my grandchildren's future than any other single period in your life. Guaranteed. Absolutely guaranteed. And if you doubt the historical significance of what you're doing, just think about this. In 200 years' time, there's going to be a kid standing in front of a civics class in some high school in this country, maybe in this city, and he's going to get up in front of his classmates and he's going to be very proud because he's going to say something like this. He said, look, I've done some genealogical research and I've looked at my ancestors, and did you know I've discovered that my great-great-great-great-grandma and granddaddy, they were in the Tea Party. They were in the Tea Party. Wow, And they saved this country in its greatest hour of need. They restored the Constitution, they restored the Republic, and we enjoy the freedoms we have today because of what they did back then. And isn't it so cool to be part of that movement? Can you think of a better thing to be associated with? A prouder thing? A more significant movement? Because this has consequences all over the planet. So I just want to say to you folk that I'm so proud to be associated with what you're doing. I'm so proud of that. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for what you have done for this country and for my country. I want to thank you so much, and God bless America. Thank you.